No time like the present. This is take one. When looking back at the Silver Age, it's easy to be blindsided by all of the revolutionary books that Marvel was releasing at the time, with superheroes becoming more human and their stories becoming more in-depth. But I believe it was acclaimed comic book fan Alan Moore who said it best. The Superman concept is a completely imaginative bit of Pulp Fiction. In all of fiction, every superhero is Superman done again. Just as every masked vigilante, every man of mystery is the Scarlet Pimpernel done again. Superman is interesting because of how broadly his life was presented during the comic book Silver Age. The Weisinger era built a mythology that rivals any great human mythology that could be named. Every aspect of this man's life, from occupation to love life to family, his origins, his ancestral heritage, everything right down to the family pet. It was all revealed in wildly vivid colors. And then you have robotic aliens, pitiful wretches whose lives are transformed into villainy, boy geniuses turned to mad science, all for the hero to engage in eternal battle. Perhaps no fictional character has had as impressive a fictional life as Superman. I recently purchased two books, Superman Exile and Superman the Silver Age Omnibus. They're not focusing. It's been a personal goal of mine to read all of post-crisis Superman, in order. I've read all the deluxe Man of Steel hardcovers, have the Triangle Era collecting dust on my shelf, and I've already pre-ordered this year's Brainiac Reborn Omnibus and the Silver Age Volume 2. And my conclusion after reading Superman Exile is that this era kinda sucks. With stories that continually feel the need to bolster themselves, bland reimaginings of iconic and imaginative villains, and a douchey Superman so full of himself and his second home, that to call him Kryptonian for the first 5 years of his publication is something I'd call laughable at best. So, I needed a palate cleanser, and that's when I made my discovery. You're all wrong about Silver Age Superman. Now, the Silver Age can be a touchy subject for comic book fans. Depending on the space, it's either the cornerstone of every character's history, continuing to define them to this day, or the devil incarnate. It's pretty important to note that before 1962, the superhero genre was in a state of rigor mortis. After World War II, the sales for these long underwear characters began to decline rapidly, with a few notable exceptions. But it wasn't until 1956 that the comic landscape began to form the concepts and stories that we be telling to this very day. But while 1956 is the start of the Silver Age for everyone else, with only 8 years before Marvel's first family, for Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, it begins a little later in 1959 going into 1960. The Superman book, since his creation and up to this point, had been relatively grounded, pitting the Man of Steel against corrupt politicians, shady businessmen, gambling rackets, and the occasional ultrahumanite. Editor-in-chief at the time, Mort Weisinger, demanded a more whimsical and serialized approach, as the popularity of the line was no longer leaping, but skyrocketing. Though at the time, the Superman books were reaching the pinnacle of their innovation. If you ask a newer reader, or even just your average comic fan what they think of these stories, you'll be met with nothing but vitriol. Krypto sucks! He's a lame, goofy Silver Age thing that we kept for nostalgia and no other reason. Silver Age Batman sucks. That era literally almost killed the character. Pre-crisis Superman sucks. Comic book Twitter loved gassing up the overpowered feats that he had in the Silver Age. It means the Silver Age sucks, and Wade getting creative control over the DC universe has been turning it into a bunch of toothless, nostalgic blandness. And my two personal favorites. Pick up an issue and enjoy, as if the average Silver Age issue isn't the dumbest thing you've ever read with next to zero emotional depth. As a Silver Age enjoyer, if you see a comic book where Jimmy Olsen marries a gorilla and your first thought is, I hope this is a serious story with emotional depth, I want Jimmy to grapple with the serious topic that is arranged marriage, you need to reevaluate your approach. A lot of these fans are younger, and their comic landscape is very different. Before stories like Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns redefined the medium with their dark, realistic edge and gritty tone, superhero stories use their insurmountable imagination and large-scale fantasies to paint their pictures with subtext. But after the comics revolution of the mid-80s, the focus shifted away from the fantastical over to the edgy, with the comics landscape almost never recovering. Now don't get me wrong, I do love the stories and think that comics are better off with them, but I do think that this shift led us to leaving behind some of those concepts that were not only larger than life, but also still relatable. Amid these shifts, and in the wake of the universe-altering Crisis on Infinite Earths, large swaths of the Silver Age was erased from DC's history, leaving a lot of characters, including their flagship Man of Steel, almost unrecognizable from their pre-crisis counterparts. To put it plainly, we haven't seen the pre-crisis Superman in a little over 40 years, with the exception of a Batman Superman issue from the early 2000s with questionable canon at best. But there is another major contributor besides the actual material itself. As the internet became a tool for spreading information, comic fans wasted no time using it to share their thoughts on all things comics. By the time of the New 52, this was DC's second Universal reboot, meant to be a no-nonsense jumping-on point for new readers, and comic book spaces were dominated by articles and conversations like this blog post from 2011, discussions on Reddit such as these, or this infamous What Culture article from 2014, an article so old that the images would not load on my computer or my phone. And in the age of regurgitation, there's no escaping these parroted opinions, which in most cases come from fans who have never engaged with or actively avoid the stories. Now, on the subject of these misconceptions, we have to talk about the infamous Superman number 125, Superman's New Power. The cover depicts Superman shooting rainbows from his fingertips as onlookers watch in astonishment. It's an issue that a lot of Silver Age deniers will refer to when talking about the silly nature of these stories and their lack of quality. Funnily enough, if you read the dialogue on the cover, you'll notice shooting rainbows isn't the power. Now, I'll admit, I had not read this issue before making this video, and I was quite shocked to find that it held plenty of depth. Entirely penned by Jerry Coleman, it's a multi-story issue, meaning 3 for the price of 1, with the introduction of the long-running backup series Untold Tales of Clark Kent. The first story is an imaginary one drawn by the great Kurt Schaffenberger. With dynamic action, detailed backgrounds, and faces that rival John Romita Sr., Schaffenberger is definitely a standout. And as far as an imaginary story, these are like what-ifs that usually take place in a dream or alternate reality. Lois Lane is put into a coma and dreams of becoming a superheroine by the name of Power Woman, while Clark Kent becomes Power Man. But remember, she doesn't know that Clark Kent and Superman are one and the same. So, hilarity ensues, and it's a really fun way to explore these characters. The second story is an untold tale from Clark Kent's college days, detailing the day that Superboy became Superman. A fun little romp in which one of Clark's professors suspects he is secretly Superboy, and so Clark must do everything in his power to hide his identity from the wise academic mind. With pencils by Superman regular Al Plastino, who excels in meticulously detailed scenes and fully rendered backgrounds on almost every panel that help bring this untold tale to life. And the final story is the titular Superman's New Power, drawn by legendary artist Wayne Boring. But don't let the name fool you, because his art is anything but. Boring was one of many housed artists, like all previously mentioned, who at the time were tasked with replicating the style of resident Superman artist Curt Swan. And like all those previous artists, they find a way to stay within those strict guidelines while also adding their own creative flair to it. You see it in Boring's action. He always shows Superman gliding through the air with such ease. And their motion is always swift and precise with hardly any sound effects. The story itself is about Superman receiving the titular new power after solving a problem inside the Earth's core. He discovers a spaceship, and upon its touch it explodes, leaving the Man of Steel seemingly unaffected. But we turn the page to find out this isn't quite true. The Man of Steel is without his super strength, but he notices a glowing light from his fingertips. Turn another page to find out that the spaceship and its pilots gave Superman the ability to send out a miniature version of himself, fully equipped to save the day. But why does this matter? Well, as the story progresses, it shows us that even if Superman was able to solve every crime with the help of some strange force, he ultimately takes pleasure in the labor he performs. He's an outcast and an alien. His being on this earth makes him fundamentally different. But as Superman, saving people and using his abilities in all of these crazy ways is the ultimate form of self-expression for Krypton's last son. But you wouldn't know that from the cover. Now, having read some more stories from the Silver Age, here are my thoughts. Let's start with Superman himself. He's a little different from the Superman we know today, but not too far off. He's smart, funny, at times a little brash, and above all, kind. He's quick to play a prank on his old pal Batman, but not before building an elaborate robot detective as a gift for his shadowy ally, as depicted in Action Comics number 241. Even back then, Kal was desperate to fit in. Take this moment from Superman number 128. Kal recounts his origin, and while explaining his powers, he takes the time to relate himself to other creatures on Earth, showing us he's not all that different. It's fun to see these stories illustrate these qualities in the way that Superman interacts with his colorful band of characters, like intrepid reporter and Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, Superman's best pal, Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's best pal, Jimmy Olsen's boss, Perry White, as well as the stellar additions like Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, Krypto the Superdog, a legion of superheroes, and fearsome foes like John Corbin's Metallo, the sinister collector from Planet Colu, Brainiac, and the misunderstood menace, Bizarro. Something I really like about these issues is their storytelling. As comics evolve, they learn to decompress themselves over time, so stories that only took one issue to tell back then can take upwards of 12 today. And as someone who reads a lot of comics, this can be quite refreshing. Now, before delving into this era, most of my favorite Superman stories were limited series, with only 3 or 4 of them coming from the main title. But now, not only are these some of my favorite stories from the main book, but they also usually only consist of 1 issue. A personal highlight for me was Action Comics 241. Cover dated June 1958 and aptly titled The Super Key to Fort Superman, this issue is a look into the private life of the Man of Steel. While out with Lois and Jimmy, Clark listens to them fawn about a pearl necklace and a sports car, respectively. Later on, he travels to the Fortress of Solitude in a beautiful sequence, once again drawn by Wayne Boring. Superman walks directly into the Lois Lane room, one of the many different chambers themed after his many friends. Like the Jimmy Olsen room, where Kal-El takes the time to finish the bumper on a handmade sports car for his favorite cub reporter. And who could forget Superman's best friend and partner in justice, Batman? Can't forget about Clark Kent, just in case. It's little moments like these that highlight the care that Superman has for everyone around him. Superman then goes on to perform some of his super hobbies. I talked before about how being Superman is like a form of self-expression for Kal-El, and this issue illustrates it perfectly. What does Clark Kent do after he gets off work? Fly back to the farm and get a lecture from the mortal farmer? No way. He goes home, writes in his journal, paints himself a picture, plays a game or two, and even conducts a little experiment. He is the child of scientists, after all. And as previously mentioned, Batman pays Superman a visit in the hopes of playing a little prank. But little does the Cape Crusader know, we're all in for a bit of Kal-El's twisted sense of humor. But for every friend Superman has, he's got 2 more foes. And this era was plentiful with new and exciting characters. But the standout to me was Superman's confused crystalline clone, Bizarro. Written by Supergirl creator Otto Binder and drawn by Wayne Boring, Action Comics 264, Superman Becomes a Bizarro, is the follow-up to Action Comics 263, The World of Bizarros, in which Superman travels to Bizarro World for the first time, and after a swift 13-page adventure, Superman is put on trial and sentenced to bizarrification. Action 246 shows the aftermath with Superman returning to Earth with some less than stellar reactions. No, Superman isn't turned into a Bizarro, but he is very scared to be. Superman dreams of a world where the bizarrification happened and how that would affect him. The answer is very little. Clark's insistence on fitting in would make it so that he would disguise himself in a similar way to how he already does, showing that his twisted visage isn't too different from the one he sees in the mirror every morning. But as Superman's disguise is revealed, everyone who sees his angular face runs away, screaming in fear. Superman goes to his friends at the Daily Planet only to be met with shock and disbelief. He's sent to jail as they think he's the real Bizarro and he killed Clark. It's his isolation that makes him feel this way. He fears that if he came clean, the people he cares about might not believe him. The nightmare shocks Superman awake. Books like these touch on the most important aspects of Superman's present, in my opinion. His connections to his friends, his villains, and even his humanity. But what about his past? Penciled once again by Wayne Boring, written by original Superman co-creator Jerry Siegel, and appropriately titled Return to Krypton, Superman 141 does just that. While chasing a runaway alien, Superman flies so fast that he breaks the time barrier and is sent back through time. He is stunned to see that he has returned to the Kryptonian homeworld before its demise. As you're well aware, Krypton has a red sun, rendering Superman powerless. After accepting his ironic situation, he finds himself a job as an actor and quickly acclimates to Kryptonian life. Superman is walking downtown when he notices his parents on a video screen, soon to be married. Kal-El wastes no time attending the ceremony, almost brought to tears. And that night, he's haunted by the knowledge of Krypton's fate. Wanting nothing more than to be with his family when the planet explodes, Superman takes an apprenticeship with his father, Jor-El. Superman also falls in love with an actress named Lila Leroy. With moves like Lori Lemaris and curiosity rivaling Lois Lane, Kal-El does his best to keep his distance. As best he can. This was probably my favorite issue from the Silver Age, and I absolutely adored it. It does an excellent job emphasizing the futility of Krypton. There may have been so many wonderful things about the planet, and Kal-El's ideal life is there, but the sun has already set on this once beautiful civilization. It also has beautiful moments between the elves showing the effect they have on the son they only knew as a baby. There's even a couple of scenes with the Kents, too. At the end of the day, comics are a medium that ebbs and flows. You wouldn't compare the filmmaking of a movie from the 1950s to a modern one in the same way that you shouldn't for these books. Meet them on their level, give them a read, and decide for yourself whether or not the book was enjoyable to you. Just because the book doesn't meet an expectation doesn't mean that you should disparage it or pass it by. Because you never know. There might be just as much merit in reading Superman 149 as there is in All-Star Superman. You just have to look for it in the same way. But hey, don't take my word for it. Thanks for watching my first real YouTube video, back in a really long time. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting that notification icon for more videos in the future. If you liked my opinions, my way of speaking, or even just the editing in the videos, I have a plethora of other videos on other platforms like TikTok and Instagram. And if you'd like to hear me articulate my thoughts a little more, I have a podcast where I talk about comic books with some of my friends and fellow creators called Crash Out Comics. It comes out every month. I'll see you in the next one.